On September 15, 1857, William Howard Taft was born in Cincinnati, Ohio. He attended Yale University and graduated in 1878. In 1880, he got his law degree from the University of Cincinnati College of Law. From 1881 to 1883, he was the assistant prosecuting attorney under John A. Caldwell. From 1885 to 1887, he was the assistant county solicitor. From 1887 to 1890, he was the judge of a superior court. In 1890, he was the U.S. Solicitor General appointed by Benjamin Harrison and argued on behalf of the federal government before the Supreme Court. From 1892 to the 1900s, he was a federal circuit judge. He was also appointed as civil governor by William McKinley in the Philippines, where he helped better relations between Filipinos and Americans. In 1904, he was a Secretary of War under Teddy Roosevelt. Then, from 1909 to 1913, Taft was the United States' 27th president, appointed by Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy hoped Taft would carry out his policies, which for the most part he did, but Roosevelt resented how different his administration was. Surprisingly, Taft hated being president. His number one dream was to be a Chief Justice. Although he disliked the presidency, he did not want Roosevelt to win in a re-election. Roosevelt publicly humiliated Taft all the time, and the two competed to be a Republican candidate. Taft won, and Roosevelt joined the Progressive Bull Moose Party. Luckily for Woodrow Wilson, all the Taft and Teddy dispute gave way for him to claim the presidency. After his presidential term, he taught constitutional law at Yale University, until his lifelong dream to become a Chief Justice came true in 1921. He held the Chief Justice position until his death in Washington, Maryland on March of 1930.
Dred Scott versus Sandford. What most people don't know is that it originated as Dred Scott versus Emerson. Emerson was the U.S. Army surgeon and Scott's owner. Emerson brought Scott from Missouri, a slave state, to Illinois, a slave-free state, and then back to Missouri again in 1838. According to the Missouri Compromise, any states above Missouri are slave-free. In 1846, Scott sues Emerson's widow. He claims that the crossing over from a slave state to a slave-free state broke his bondage as a slave. When the case was first brought up in the lower court in St. Louis, it was decided that Scott and his family were property. In 1850, the verdict of the retrial was in Scott's favor. But the Missouri Supreme Court reversed the lower court ruling, and Scott's lawyers appealed their case to the United States Supreme Court. In 1854, when the case was brought forth in the U.S. Supreme Court, the case became Dred Scott versus Sandford because John F.A. Sandford was the brother of Mrs. Emerson, who was in charge of her estates. And according to the Supreme Court ruling of Dred Scott versus Sandford, Dred Scott was indeed property. Because of this decision, the Missouri Compromise was now unconstitutional, meaning that slavery could now spread like wildfire within the states, and Congress could have no control over it. This event influenced the 3-year tension leading up to the Civil War, where once and for all North versus South ended the dispute against slavery.